Wood Segley, John F. Flores, Catherine E. Leonard, Justin S. McLaughlin, Jean Marie Napolitano, Naomi Neville. There's a quorum present, Mr. Chair.
All right, Joe, I'm going to turn it over to you now. Oh, Julie, actually. Go ahead, Julie.
Okay. Good evening. Thank you for coming tonight. The purpose tonight is...
Yeah. that sequencing there. You can use a footstool when you go.
Okay. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to just do an overview of the upcoming design, build, operate contract that we're going to be hopefully presenting to the council for their review and ultimately their approval, hopefully, at the May 25th council meeting. The Department of Utilities has been working on the system master plan since 2012, which was related to the CSO consent decree we've entered into, and one of the elements of that was improvements to the wastewater plant, increasing its capacity as a way to avoid CSOs. And since then, the first thing we did was we looked at the existing contract and we decided to proceed that it was in the best interest of the city to look at a new DBO contract due to the age of the current contract and some of the elements that didn't quite fit the needs of the city. And part of this new DBO contract implements the approximately $40 million worth of improvements that are required at the wastewater plant. The first thing the city did was they contracted services for an engineering advisor to assist us through the RFP and the RFP process and the ultimate procurement process, and that firm was CDM Smith. And with us tonight is Pat Gallagher, Carol Rigo, Megan Moody, and Bill McConnell, who have been working on the procurement process to where we are now. They are also assisting with the drafting of the contract. So the purpose of tonight's meeting, we've essentially have selected the preferred firm for the contract, and that is it's Newport Water Services. It's a conglomerate of AECom, who would be the engineer, C.H. Nickerson, the contract, and Suez, who would be the operator. Suez is the current operator of that. And so now what I'll do is before I go too far into the presentation, is turn it over to Carol Rigo, and we'll kind of give you the highlights of the contract, how we got to where we are, and what are the important elements of the current contract and the fiscal impacts. Carol?
Hi. If I can figure out how to do this. I won't lower it so that the next person can have it at a normal height. Anyway, thank you. The agenda that we're going to talk about tonight is a little bit of background, most of which you know, but I just want to set the context for what we're going to talk about. The process that was used to select the contractor for what we're going to be talking about for the DBO contract. And then we're going to get into the key elements of the contract itself. We're going to talk a little bit about the technical features of what's going to be done. We're going to talk about the budgets and the costs, and then we're going to talk about the city operation of the collection system or the gravity piping system, and then open it up for questions. So there'll be three of us speaking tonight. I'm going to do the first portion. Megan Moody is going to do the part about the treatment plant, and then Pat Gallagher will talk about the costs and the financial aspects. Okay, so by way of background, as you're familiar with already, the consent decree requires the city to do a number of programs as outlined in the master plan, the system master plan. The overall deadline for everything is June 30th, 2033. And there are several major components that need to be done over the next several years. I have them listed here. The one that we're going to talk about today is the one next to the bottom, upgrade the water pollution control plant to a 30 MGD capacity, million gallons per day, capacity to address wet weather flows and mitigate CSOs. And specific to that one item in the consent decree, there are two deadlines. The first deadline is by June 30th, 2016, so coming up soon. The city shall award a DBO contract to complete the upgrades. And by June 28th, 2019, so 3 years later, the city shall complete construction and initiate operation of those upgrades. The upgrades being, at a very high level, increasing the capacity to 30 million gallons per day. And Megan will talk specifically about what that entails. So just to give you some background on how the system is divided up for the sake of our presentation and the contract, we're going to be talking today about two categories of assets. This is the overall water pollution control system shown in the map, and we're going to talk about two different categories of assets. The Category A assets, and the easy way to remember that is those are essentially the above-ground assets. And Category B assets are essentially the below-ground assets. There's a few little crossovers here and there, but it's probably, 95-5 kind of thing. So with regard to the Category A assets or above-ground assets, the major components are listed here and shown on this map. Obviously, the biggest one is the water pollution control plant. That's what needs to be upgraded. There were 2 CSO facilities, as you know, 14 pump stations, and then the UV disinfection facility at Easton's Beach. And the Category B assets, or below-ground assets, are essentially the piping systems. So there's the sanitary sewer system, which is listed here, shown on the left, all these miles of pipe, manholes, it's pretty massive. And the stormwater system, which collects the storm runoff, and it's another very large system, not quite as large as the sewer system, but miles and miles of pipes, outfalls, and lots of catch basins. So as Julia mentioned, when the city started to look at how to implement this project, they engaged CDM Smith as the city advisor. Many of you have been on the council for a little while and know that we played that same role on the water treatment plant project. And on this particular project, what we've done so far is we started off evaluating the existing conditions, and in order to prepare a very detailed request for qualifications and then a request for proposals. We assisted the city in reviewing those proposals and negotiating the contract, which is the stage that we're in now. And we have provided support for being able to get the funding for the project. And then as the project proceeds, what we will do is a similar role like we did in the water plant projects. We will oversee those upgrades, make sure everything's being done in accordance with the contract and the request for proposals, make sure the facility is started up and tested and meets all of the standards that we've set, and again, continue to support the funding for the project. So just a couple slides on the selection process to give you some background on that. We were looking for a contract that was for a design, build, operate. Okay, so designing the plant upgrades, constructing them, and then operating for a 20-year period. So in October of 2014, the city issued a request for qualifications with very detailed requirements because this is a large project and a long-term commitment. And 3 submittals were received, and the evaluation committee shortlisted those 3 submittals to 2 very highly qualified teams. And in October of 2015, the request for proposals was issued, very voluminous document with all of the detailed requirements. And in December, 2 proposals were received. They all complied with the requirements. We conducted, along with the city evaluation committee, evaluations of those proposals. Based on the initial evaluations, generated several rounds of questions, went back and forth with the proposal teams, conducted interviews in February, received best and final offer in March, and later in March, on the 23rd, the evaluation committee made the selection. They selected the team called Newport Water Services, and Newport Water Services consists of 3 entities. AECOM, which is the design engineer of record. C.H. Nickerson is the contractor that will construct the upgrades, and Suez will be the operator who will operate the plant now, during the upgrades while they're being constructed, and then for the next 20 years. As some of you may remember,
You know,
Just with the team, so who's sort of leading the team?
can you hang on to that for
Oh, okay, yeah.
a couple more bullets?
Yeah.
Okay. AECOM Nickerson, as some of you may remember from the water treatment plant project, they were the design-build team for the Lawton Valley and Station 1 treatment facilities. And as Julia mentioned in the intro, Suez is currently the operator under the existing contract. They were formerly United Water. The Suez and AECOM companies have worked together on several DBO projects in New England and in Rhode Island, actually. And to answer your question, the specifics, AECOM will be the guarantor for the project team for the first 3 years. And essentially during the design and while the upgrades are being constructed. And then once the upgrades are constructed, Suez will become the guarantor for the remaining period of the contract.
Okay.
So does that?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'm going to switch this over to Megan, and she's going to give you an overview about what's involved in the plant upgrades. And then when she gets through that piece of it, then Pat will talk about the costs.
Good evening. So in order to implement the plant upgrades, the capacity of the plant will need to be increased from a maximum of 19.7 million gallons per day currently to 30 million gallons per day in order to meet the requirements of the consent decree and address wet weather requirements and mitigate CSOs. Those upgrades, the major process components of these upgrades include a new headworks facility, which will remove large debris and grit from the process before it gets to primary treatment and will safeguard reliability of equipment in the process downstream. Chemically enhanced primary treatment is a chemical process that's going to be added, which will provide a buffer to the impact of wet weather treatment, wet weather flows to the existing primary tanks. There currently is an existing 4 aeration tanks. Those can be reconfigured into 2 treatment trains, and they'll be reconfigured to operate in what's called a contact stabilization mode, and this will optimize the treatment capability, and due to having additional head available in the tanks, the water level will actually be raised, increasing the volume in the tanks to provide for treatment of the increased loads. The secondary clarifiers will be also made deeper by increasing the wall height of the existing tanks, and the tank internals will also be replaced for better sludge removal. And the existing contact tanks that are there that use sodium hypochlorite are going to be converted to a new UV or ultraviolet disinfection system, which will provide disinfection of fecal coliform and enterococci to meet the RIPD's discharge permit. And this also removes 2 chemicals from use, increasing safety to operators and reducing costs for chemicals. The solids processing is going to be upgraded with both new thickening equipment and dewatering, and this will minimize odors and provide a better way for reducing disposal costs. And the odor control system will also be upgraded with a new biofilter, and this will provide more reliable odor control with less chemicals. There will be some site improvements as well with a better traffic pattern and signage and parking. And to address climate change, the facility and equipment that's affected will be protected from the 100-year flood condition. And several green components have been included in the proposed design, which repurposes existing facilities using existing tankage for a new process, which reduces the impact to the existing site. High-efficiency equipment is included, and there's also a provision for possible implementation of solar power at the plant, which would provide electricity that could then be used at the plant for operations. So here we have an aerial view of the existing plant looking west towards the Navy. And the slide's kind of tough to see, but we have the flow coming into the plant that's all treated through the existing headworks facility, is then treated through the primary clarifiers and pumped up to the aeration tanks. The flow is then distributed to the 4 secondary clarifiers and then finally disinfected at the chlorine contact tanks. Adjacent to the contact tanks is an effluent pumping station. Under high flows and high tide conditions, the flow has to be pumped out of the plant to the outfall, and under normal average conditions, it's discharged by gravity. Solids collected from the secondary clarifiers and the primary clarifiers are pumped to the sludge and thickening and dewatering building, where it's processed and then hauled off-site for final disposal.
Can you tell me, you said in certain situations you pump it out.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just describe that a little bit more? Where does
Sure.
it go?
So when tides are at a normal level,
Yeah.
the flow can discharge by gravity
Okay.
through the pipeline out to the outfall and into the bay.
Okay.
When
That's what
the
we're
tide,
trying to mitigate, right?
sorry?
That's what we're trying to mitigate against? We don't want that to happen?
Right. So when the tide's higher during a storm event and there's wet weather flow at the plant, it needs to be pumped out.
And you had mentioned, sorry, the
Yes, ma'am.
traffic, the improved traffic. What's that?
We have a slide with the traffic pattern coming
Okay.
up, but essentially there'll be better truck traffic to go in and out
Okay.
and dedicated staff and visitor parking.
So it's interior, it's not
Int-
okay.
correct, yeah.
Thank you.
Are there any new facilities going on this footprint, or how do you do the enlargement? Does it fit within the footprint?
For the most part, yes. The headworks facility will be a bit larger, but it's going to utilize part of the existing structure. So it will have a building on it, which will be new. So here we have kind of a schematic of the process. And so the first portion of the plant is the headworks, and this is going to include new equipment, including fine screens and grit removal, along with chemical addition points for the chemically enhanced primary treatment. The primary clarifiers, aeration tanks, and secondary clarifiers are existing structures that will have internal improvements, but the structures themselves will not be expanded. And then the disinfection, UV disinfection is going to be retrofitted into the existing chlorine contact tanks. So no new structure will have to be built. It will be placed in an existing structure and retrofitted as needed. And then the effluent pump station pumps will be replaced in the existing structure to provide better reliability during wet weather flows. And then for sludge processing, there'll be 2 new rotary drum thickeners and 1 new rotary press for dewatering. Here we have a sequence of construction that was included in Newport Water Services proposal. Maintenance of plant operations during construction is essential to keeping the plant online and complying with the permit throughout the entire construction period. And in this figure, it shows a staged approach with different colors showing how each unit process will be upgraded through the construction period. And we will provide oversight of that process throughout the whole stage.
How long do you expect construction to take?
3 years total from contract signing.
At the beginning of this, we have a deadline, 19. It's got to be done, yeah.
Construction probably wouldn't start till about spring of 2017. Well, submittals before that, but active construction would be in 2017, early 2017. Here we have the site improvements, which includes a more dedicated path for truck traffic going in and out of the site. Currently, trucks don't always use that second exit, so they're moving around and not just going straight through the site. There'll be dedicated parking for visitors and staff, and additional signage for chemical deliveries and sledge trucks. The preliminary sizing for the potential on-site solar system consists of a little over 900 panels. These would be installed on top of existing roofs or on open spaces on the site, and is estimated to provide about 296,000 kilowatt hours of electricity per year. With that, we're going to get into the costs. Turn that over to Pat.
Before you move on from there,
Yeah.
what I noticed after we had privatized the management, and they had worked on the smell emanating from the system, and it was really good for a long time. I've noticed within the last couple of years, and I've gotten phone calls about the smell, and you're not treating it chemically, but could you just give some sort of assurance that,
Sure. So currently there's a chemical scrubber that is installed in one of the buildings. It's at capacity and it's met the useful life of the piece of equipment. The new system is a biofilter, doesn't require chemicals to treat it. There's active biology in the biofilter that treats the odors. And this new biofilter would take care of any existing processes with odors and any new odors from new processes that are added.
Can you say something like it won't have any odor anymore, or it mitigates the odor?
We have a lot stricter limits for odor in this new contract, which, based on our experience, should not have, should reduce nuisance complaints, if any.
yeah.
It's hard to say none, because,
Yeah.
And I think it was 2000 that we had privatized the management, and after about 6 months, they seemed to have it under control. However, within the last couple of years, and it almost makes me think perhaps dated equipment or new technology wasn't, installed. So, I'm just kind of concerned, because a lot of people are affected by that.
When the new contract goes into place, one of the first things they need to put forward that the city gets to review and approve is their odor control plan for the next 3 years, because the facilities that Megan is talking about are part of a new project, so they're not going to actually come online for 3 years. So there's a definite concern for what's going to happen, during this construction process. When the 3 years is finished, as Megan indicated, the standards that we have in the contract are quite strict. They're stronger than what exists now, and based upon other projects we've done around the country, they're kind of state-of-the-art standards that should result in little to no odors. It's going to be a transition period. Thanks, Meg. So the last part of our presentation before we get to additional questions, and please, if there are any questions, as we go along these slides, please feel free to ask in the middle. So the first item is about cost. So the upgrades, the project that Megan just described, primarily or entirely at the wastewater treatment facility, the contract provides a fixed price of rounded 37.9, basically $38 million for the design, the permitting, the construction, and the testing of all those improvements. And again, that'll take about 3 years. The city will also have a contingency. We did this on the water plant as well. In this case, it's a $2 million contingency because change conditions. There is no question that as this project proceeds, ground's going to be disturbed. There's going to be a lot of conditions that have not been seen in the last 20 years. There are going to be some change conditions. There's going to be tanks that are being examined, underground for the first time. So there's budget to address, some of these things that are going to come up for sure. And the real challenge is to make sure we live, within that budget and actually spend as little as possible. There's also a few design alternatives. Megan mentioned earlier about having to pump the effluent out of the plant under certain conditions. We have an alternative in the contract where if the city decides as this project's going forward that there's enough contingency funds available, we can have the contractor actually enhance their ability to pump against even higher flood conditions than they're required. This is really looking way down the road, in terms of like a 100-year flood, for example. So that wouldn't be done unless there was money available to do it. The solar option is an alternative in the contract. So the funds for this, as you recall, a few years ago, an ordinance was adopted for not just this project, but some of the other improvements at the CSOs, a $50 million bond ordinance. Basically, most of that money, $40 million of that, is allocated to this project. And, as Megan mentioned earlier, the schedule is that we have a, guaranteed completion date by your consent decree deadline, again, 3 years from now. So that's about all we're going to say at this point, about the design build capital improvements. Any questions, of course, we'll get into. But the next more complicated area that we'll spend some time on is the operation and maintenance. And this is where the Category A and Category B, comes into play a bit in terms of what the new contract covers in terms of this company's responsibility for long-term operation and maintenance. This is where this new contract departs significantly from the existing contract. You might say there's a new DBO model here that we have, and it has to do with the fact that the Category B, the underground gravity systems, will only be operated by this company for the first 6 to 12 months, and while the city transitions into taking over those assets themselves. And we'll talk a little more about that down the road, but that's kind of an important feature here, right, with the fee. So the A assets, the so-called above-ground assets, the treatment plant, the pump stations, we do have some force mains underground, CSO facilities, so are all under this long-term O&M agreement with the new company. As Carol mentioned, it's a 20-year term, but this could be terminated at your convenience, at your discretion, at any time during that 20 years. So, the current contract is actually, as you mentioned, the year 2000, is going to be terminated a few years earlier to allow this new contract to come into place. So we always have that flexibility. If you're 5 years into this and are not happy, you can, make a drastic change. But it's not something you would plan to do, but you've got that right. So you have kind of a 20-year commitment from them, but you've got the ability to modify that. So in terms of the, what we call the service fee, the annual cost that the city will incur under this contract, we have this table that shows, again, this is just the Category A facilities that the company will operate, and you see there's a 3-year period, fiscal year 2017 through 19, and then there's a 17-year period. So the 3-year period is the first 3 years of the contract while the construction of these upgrades are going on. So that covers the contractor, the company, to operate and maintain the existing plant and all the above-ground assets, the CSO facilities, the pump stations, and so forth. When the new plant comes online in 3 years, you see a bit of a bump up in the fee that will be incurred at that point. And, part of that is related to some new processes. For example, Megan mentioned there's some new sludge processing facilities. So there's some additional cost. It's fortunately not a very big jump, but it is a small jump and additional cost for the new plant. Now, to the right of the table, what we show is how that $6.2 million figure, for example, for the first 3 years, is broken down. And this is, again, a bit different than your existing agreement, and there's some reasons for this that we can describe. So what that $6.2 million figure includes are three basic components. The largest component is the, if you will, the standard operation preventive maintenance that is a fixed scope that they will do for a fixed fee of $5.1 million. Also in their scope, and this is also in the scope of the existing contract, but not called out, is their responsibility to perform any and all corrective maintenance and repairs, as things break down or things need to be overhauled on all of these Category A assets. And that fee is set at a fixed amount of $654,000, and they own the risk of what it actually costs to do that. And then when it comes to renewal and replacement, this is where there are projects that they propose, the city will approve, that you look down the road a bit and you say, okay, this particular pump, we know in 2 or 3 years is going to be at the end of its useful life, so it needs to be replaced. And there's a $425,000 annual amount dedicated to those projects. The numbers are very similar, for the next 17 years after that first 3 years. So below the table, we have this additional fee, which is a temporary fee. We call it the interim Category B fee, and this is where the company will continue for a 6 to 12-month period to do what they're doing now, basically, in operating and maintaining, repairing the underground gravity storm system and collection system, and they will support the city's transition into taking that over. So we have it as a monthly amount because the city could take this over in 6 months, 7 months, 8 months. We have basically a 6 to 12-month window for that to occur. Once the city takes over, that fee goes away. So it's a temporary 6 to 12-month fee. So in terms of, these fees are fixed fees, but there are, as always in the fixed fee world, there are reasons and basis to adjust the fees down the road. So the one item, again, this is in your existing contract, this is in all of these contracts. When you look at particularly a long-term period, there's an annual adjustment based upon inflation, and that's outside of everyone's control. So you put in an index. We use the Consumer Price Index. That's been very low lately. It looks like it's going to stay low for a while, but 10 years from now, who knows? So that adjustment gets made automatically. This contract has these fees stay fixed for 4 years. So that adjustment doesn't start on day one. It doesn't start till the 5th contract year. So you're going to have a very predictable, if you will, flat 4 years here. And then in year 5, we'll start to see the CPI, adjust the numbers a bit. Currently we're looking at 1 to 2%, 5 years. Who knows? But it's on the 2 to 3 to 4 to 5%, 6% neighborhood. If we look at history. The other point at the very bottom is an important feature. Again, this is not in the existing contract, but what we found in this contract, we find all these long-term contracts, is it's virtually impossible on some of these items to predict 10, 15, 20 years down the road. So there are some aspects of these fees, not completely open, like the O&M fee at the top, the $5 million fee, that basically is going to stay at that level for 20 years, subject to CPI inflation. The only way that particular item would be adjusted if there's a change in law, things of that nature, the project changes. But in particular, we have at the bottom of the slide, the first bullet, sludge disposal quantity cap, right? So currently, the amount of sludge generated by the treatment plant and the amount of sludge generated by the new plant, we have a pretty good handle on what that level should be. But when we start looking 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road, it's impossible to predict because it depends on flow coming into the plant and growth in the community and things of that nature. So what the contract says is that for the first 5 years, these fees are all fixed, and after 5 years, that cap will be examined, and it could be increased for the next 5 years, or depending upon what occurred during the first 5 years, you can actually decrease it. That'll be up to the city based upon what's going on at the time. That 5-year adjustment also will apply to the corrective maintenance spending and to the renewal and replacement funding, because after 5 years, you're going to have a very good handle on what the corrective maintenance costs were. And again, if they're lower than this fee would have, had you been, you'll be in a position to lower those fees. On the other hand, if they're higher, we have a cap that they can't go up by more than 25%. But if they demonstrate that they are, 10% higher, then that would be adjusted. So from a long-term perspective, this 5-year, examination of certain pieces of the fee really helps ensure that you've got a long-term, sustainable, fiscally responsible contractor.
So that's fee.
Yep.
When you look at it, review it, that's not unilateral. That would be both the city and...
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Yep. So that one slide's got a lot of information, but so is there anything we want to talk about there before? Because we're now going to shift into the whole Category B area, but this is kind of the heart of the payment, terms under this new DBO contract. But a lot of thought and work has gone into it, both with the city staff and with the proposers. Okay, so the next topic, the last topic, is this whole question of the Category B assets and the city operation and maintenance of those. So, as Carol indicated earlier, B is below ground. It's the gravity, pipe network. I think, some of the challenges that we have seen on the current arrangement where the contractor is responsible for all those pipe systems is that responsiveness and emergency response maybe can be challenging, because you have a contractor, you have subcontractors. With the city being in charge of this, you have direct control over responding to things like that.
So that
Sure.
one statement that says very few collection
Right.
systems are privately operated.
Yeah.
So it's unusual now that ours are currently privately operated?
Yes,
And this would make us more in line with other...
Absolutely.
Okay,
You
thank
can look across the country and count on one hand probably the number of communities out of 50,000
That
that do
subcontractors
this. Yeah.
Okay.
Collections. not-
Collection,
Collections,
right.
that's what I was...
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So one of the driving forces here, besides the better effectiveness of providing those services, is cost. And we took a hard look at the cost variables here, right? So in the A level there, what that shows is what the proposers had indicated it would cost for them to operate and maintain the collection storm systems, basically $2.4 million a year. We then separately developed I have to say, a very preliminary budget, for the city to do this. There's a lot more work to be done yet to flesh out the details of the budget, but we feel confident that it's within the realm of what it should be, more or less, but there's definitely going to be some refinement of this. But we make a long story short, it come up at about $1.8 million a year, including new equipment being leased and including new labor staff of 11 full-time city employees to perform these services. And the other thing that is important is that, as you know, the city currently does this with its own employees on the water side. So the whole water distribution system is maintained by city employees. So this will be, expanding that role. So this is not a new thing by any means. So based upon those numbers, we see, and I underscore the word potential. I don't know that I think it's highly unlikely it would be any higher than this, but in the range of $600,000 a year to be saved here by the city taking this over.
And did I hear you say 11 new employees?
Yes. Yes.
And what, would they be part of a union, or they,
Well, I guess,
they would be,
I
right?
guess I shouldn't tell you that secret, but the answer is yes. We haven't had those discussions yet, but presumably,
What union are they
we've already
typically?
had some preliminary contact on that, and the answer is yes.
So when you project the costs of the labor, are you factoring in then
Yes.
those
Yes.
also? Those
Yes.
costs as well? Okay, thank you.
But if, want to put it differently, those are loaded labor rates.
Yeah.
That's the total cost for retirement, health insurance.
Yep.
Okay,
That's correct.
okay.
So we're pretty close to wrapping up. I think probably cover a lot of these already in terms of, the non-cost advantages of the city directly operating, maintaining these underground pipe systems. Probably the most important one might be the first bullet and the last bullet, right? Basically, the more direct control, more effective response, and the needed repairs on these underground assets, what is needed and the priority of what is needed probably changes on, I'm probably not exaggerating to say almost a daily basis. So this way the city will be able to, respond to those changes and really be more effective. And we're not going to go through all, this is the last slide, we're certainly not going to go through all of these, but just gives you a flavor of the scope of the tasks and activities that are involved here. This is a pretty extensive, set of tasks that this 11-person city staff group is going to be undertaking. That's the end of our presentation. We're happy to address any more questions.
I have a question in regard to, we have a contract
Yep.
with another community. Does that impact?
No. The answer is, no. We have a contract with another community.
Right.
This is a relationship between us and a new contractor. That other contract is not impacted. That's a relationship between us and that other community. It's not impacted by this. It hasn't, let me take that back. Some of the things in that contract that we have with that other community will cost that other community, they financially participate in our system by virtue of that contract. So, yes, but does it change that contract in any, the fundamentals of that contract? No.
If in fact this were built to accept additional flow, and we received additional flow, then the other community would share in that. You know what I'm saying?
The other community is responsible for a percentage of the capital improvements.
Even with something like this?
Yes,
Oh, okay.
yes.
All right.
So
handle.
we're building a bigger plant because
Yep.
we're mandated to build a bigger plant.
Yep.
They have a responsibility to share in the greater cost.
Okay. Good.
If we voted for one of those enhancements, like the big pump that could pump out more, they'd still be it's still percentage based.
Yes.
Okay. What would the solar panel grid do? Would it power the plant, or would you,
I'm sorry?
the solar panel grid
It would generate power to be used by the plant.
by the plant itself?
Absolutely, yes.
And
that's-
stay within
Exactly,
itself?
right,
Okay.
right. And you can-
It can't meet all of the needs of
Of the
the
plant.
electricity.
I mean, even just,
It would offset the usage of the
It would
electricity
offset
of the
directly on site, it would be avoided costs of having to buy power from the grid, but it's not enough to power the entire plant by itself.
Okay.
You still need regular,
What are the chances of disruptions during the transition period? Is any disruptions in service during this transition period?
During the 3 years while the construction's going on?
Yeah.
I think, one of the things Megan talked about is a, what do we call that again? No, the MOPO, yeah. One of the things that's really going to help is that the current operator, and even under the new contract, the operator and the design builder are one team together. So they're going to be working together. There definitely is risk of things occurring, but we've got a lot of requirements in our contract, and they've got to develop a plan, and they really have to, work around that. If you had a separate operator and separate constructor, the issue gets much bigger than what we have here. So that's one of the benefits of the DBO is having them together.
I guess what I am looking for is, we're spending $40 million to upgrade the plant, which gets rolled into debt service, which gets rolled into rates. We're now talking about how much it's going to cost us to operate the plant, which gets rolled into rates. Do we have any expression of what those rates are going to look like as we go forward in time, spending all of this money? And I understand we weren't asked if we wanted to do this. So
Right.
this is what we have to do, but it provides us, as we've talked about recently, the motivation to go look for other ways to fund. And that helps to motivate us when we see what those costs might actually be to the public.
Yeah, I think at one of the other workshops we had, Julie, to the microphone. Julie did have a projection on one of her PowerPoints on what it looks like going forward in terms of what we need to support this in terms of money. And just before you get into any of the details of that, if you have it, Julia, we are continuing to look at different ways to fund this. We looked at a couple of ways that we've already presented to you to try to offset some of the rate costs. This taking over the collection system, even though it is a way to offset some of the rate increase, at least this year, and obviously it has an effect on years going out. In addition to that, and one of the slides I'm still keen on that Julia presented, and one of the points, and I've had a discussion with a number of you about it, is looking at a stormwater utility, because based upon a rough estimate, 15% of the cost that's involved here is related to stormwater. Addressing the stormwater as a separate cost, if you will, at least from my perspective, and I think from everyone's perspective that was had the discussion, you have a much larger base of support. So that's something we need to look at. We're going to look at as well in the coming year. But Julia, if you could fill in some of the blanks based upon what Justin's question was.
If you could, is that the briefing we gave here about a month ago?
Yeah, somewhat, and I was just going to do some
It's sitting on my
highlights.
desk, so if you tell me where it is, I'll go look at it.
Well, it doesn't in here, I didn't really project what, like, fiscal year 18 was at the time, but we can do that exercise. But I just want to note that in that presentation, under the CIP, there's another project that's substantial in scope that's coming up at the completion of the plant, and that is the North End Sewer Reroute. So once we have one more large construction project that is included in the consent decree, and that has to be completed by June 30th of 2021. So that will be starting like with design in 2018. And the purpose of that is we have all the flow, I don't know if you call it, from the north part of the city that flows all the way down to Long Wharf, and then we pump it back up to the wastewater plant. And part of the plan was to put a pump station somewhere, I think it was at Van Zant and Farewell by the playground or something, to intercept the flow, pump it into the Long Wharf force main at that point and to the plant. And that would save capacity at the Long Wharf pump station, which feeds into the Washington CSO facility. So that was another part of the system master plan. So that will probably, my opinion is that it will be a debt project that we funded through debt. So that would be something we haven't really looked at it, the projection. I'm kind of earmarking around 6 to 8 million for that project. So we have a better handle now to do projections because we know we have our debt service, we have a better idea about the debt service for the plant. We know now a better, because we now have the numbers of where we are with the O&M for at least the next 5 years before there's any adjustments, so we can start looking at that. And then we have our ongoing capital projects, which is part of the system master plan was improvements to the underground piping. So that's in the CIP, that will stay there, and that was in that presentation. So I can't say that there won't be any more increases.
Oh, no,
We're starting to get to a stable period, but my concern is this next project, which is coming, which is another bump.
But I think it's important that you all recognize what you've done and what we're going to continue to do, and is try to look at alternate sources of revenue. For example, like the 1% meal and beverage tax that you passed with the targeted improvements with regard to that. We've got to continue to look at those things as well, to try to take the piggyback off of the...
Will we continue to look for federal grants, because this problem is not a problem just for Newport, but communities all over the U.S. with the infrastructure and water and sewer. So will we continue to?
We will continue to look, but most of the programs are the state revolving loan funds.
Okay.
And there is, there's green elements, but a lot of those are looking more towards stormwater. It's not like the high-efficiency
Right.
pumps. You used to be able to get some relief from that, but now that's just automatic. You put in VFDs and that, and high efficiency. What we are looking on the solar component is there's a lot of programs in the state right now for solar. So we are looking at that as maybe being able to receive some funding for that, which would help offset future costs.
I did want to follow up on Joe's start, that conversation too, of the stormwater utility, because just as a side note, my parents live in Milton, Mass. They just started their own stormwater utility. Each property is being assessed on its pervious versus non-pervious surfaces, and they will get an annual tax based on their impervious surfaces, but it's citywide. It will be done fairly on all properties, so they have hospitals, they have parking lots. It's an incentive in the future to build with more pervious surfaces. So it's certainly an interesting concept, and I know we've talked about it, but it's a really interesting
And I wanted to
idea.
follow up on that. I think did you say that the cost of the stormwater system, which using this, is roughly 15% of what we're...
It's about approximately 15% of the sewer
So if we
budget,
were
of the
going after
budget.
stormwater utility of some sort, we'd be looking at addressing 15% of the
Percent of
cost.
that
That's
it-
47 miles. Yeah.
I like the fact that it's an incentivizer for the future development to build more grass.
Yeah, I think we can tie it into a whole lot of other things in terms of our traditional structure of how we raise revenue, in terms of relief and reducing some costs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a wrap, Carol.